Hello, in this video I would like to present a proposed model that I have been considering and thinking about, which I'm calling the learning ecology of the flipped classroom. Before I show and explain the model, I thought I'd give a bit of background as to where the idea developed from. Within much of the literature and the lexicon that surrounds the approaches of flipped pedagogies, two terms tend to be used, that of flipped learning and the flipped classroom. Now, as Yarborough et al. Highlight, the two terms are not synonymous. Therefore, for the development of this model, I have provided these two definitions, with flipped learning being the methodology or the pedagogy, and the flipped classroom being the environment and the spaces into which the learning is designed and delivered and experienced. And thus, these two things come together to form the broader, more holistic learning ecology of the flipped classroom. Ecologies find their origins in the studies of nature to describe the complexity, diversity, and interdependence of biodiverse environments. The analogous link of these natural ecologies has been compared to the complexities of educational systems by many, and the term a learning ecology has been coined. I have taken this a step further with this model to argue that flipped learning, which sees a blend of pedagogies, collaboration between learners, activities taking place outside and inside the classroom, underpinned by technology, has a level of complexity and interdependence that warrants a learning ecology description. Within the learning ecology of the flipped classroom, as with those of nature, we have inhabitants. In this case, it's the learners and the educators that experience the flipped learning. We also have habitats. These are the physical locations and digital environments that are used to deliver the learning. There are also other influences on the ecology, like the interactions between these inhabitants and the feature of time. Before I show you the model and explain how it works, I thought I ought to put the caveat in that it has been designed with the consideration of the attributes and behaviours of higher education. This is not to say that it couldn't be applied to other sectors. Within the flipped learning approach, these interdependencies happen across three distinct phases: the pre-sessional activities, the classroom contact time, and the post-sessional activities. During the pre-sessional activities, the learners are exposed to new concepts to develop an understanding of their subject, and also preparing for the in-class contact time. During the classroom contact time, the educator is present and often designs activities that see collaborative learning that allow the students to apply their learning in problem-solving activities, facilitated and supported by feedback and feed-forward from the present educator. Post the session, the learners are able to compound their understanding through follow-on activities. They may also undertake further study as the phases then repeat. It is the role of the educator within the learning ecology to design and structure this learning across all of the phases. This includes setting the learning objectives, deciding what subject knowledge and content needs to be covered, the learning methods and approaches that will be adopted, the medium through which the learning materials will be delivered, and the methods of assessment that will be used. The individual learner will experience and has to navigate through all of the phases. However, their experience extends beyond the period of the flipped learning, as they will enter the flipped learning experience with prior knowledge and also preferred approaches to learning. Once they've traversed the flipped learning experience, they will go on to further study, hopefully with new knowledge of their subject and having applied it successfully. In parallel to the individual learner, a learning community will experience the flipped learning alongside them. This learning community is actually comprised of two distinct but possibly overlapping subsets. The first subset is the wider cohort of learners that are formally enrolled and studying a course alongside the individual. It is this cohort that the educator has the responsibility of, and from the perspective of the individual learner, may feel forced to interact with them through contrived group work. Nevertheless, to succeed, they will have to establish a working relationship with them. The second group in the learning community is the individual learner's informal wider learning network, which is defined as the people that the learner turns to for support with their studies or to expand their understanding of the subject. There may be overlap in these two groups, as learners that are enrolled on the course may be friends or trusted peers that form part of the individual learner's wider learning network. A further subtlety regards the learning community is its formation over time. The individual learner's wider learning network is probably quite an established community and will be entering the flipped learning experience alongside them. The same may be said for some of the student cohort if the learner has studied alongside their peers before. However, on the other hand, this may be the first time that the learners have had to study together, and hence the community will start from the moment they enter the flipped learning experience. The community will extend beyond the flipped learning experience as they would have established relationships working together. Having now established how the inhabitants of the ecology act and behave and their roles, we now need to look at the other dependencies we've identified. The only fixed time at which the cohort comes together within the flipped learning experience is during the classroom contact time, and this takes place in a formal institutional physical location or classroom, which tends to be set up and defined by the educator. In the outside of classroom phases, during the pre-sessional and post-sessional activities, where these are studied is defined by the learner. They may choose to study in formal institutional locations, such as the library, or they may study in informal environments, such as at home or in social places like cafes. Time is also something that is defined by the learner during these phases, and is made up of two variables. The first is how long the learners choose to spend undertaking these activities, and the second is how far in advance of the classroom contact time they choose to undertake those activities. Both of these time variables will have an impact on the success of the learner within the flipped learning experience. The next influence within the learning ecology we need to look at are the interactions between these inhabitants. Within much of the literature, the only formal interaction between the educator and the learners occurs face-to-face during the classroom contact time. Furthermore, this is actually the only formal occasion in which the individual learner and the learning community also interact. However, due to the learner-determined nature of the outside of classroom phases, there is nothing to stop the learners having informal interactions during these activities. The post-session activities may differ slightly, as the educator may choose to implement some sort of continued formal interaction within the learning design. Now these interdependencies of the interactions and the environments in which the learning takes place have been identified, this completes our first iteration of a simple learning ecology of the flipped classroom. However, one other major influence on the experience is that of the role of technology. One of the core features of flipped learning is the utilization of digital environments and technology to deliver some of this learning during the outside of classroom activities. A lot of the time, this is done and structured by the educator within formal institutional virtual learning environments. However, another important digital environment to take into account is the personal learning environment of the individual learner. This is not an institutional platform, but a selection of tools chosen by the learner to help facilitate their learning. This may include the use of social networks to communicate with the learning community, or the tools they use to make their notes and manage their learning. This even includes the devices they use, and due to the fact that learners may be migrating information from the institutional environment into their personal space, means that the two overlap within the ecology. The influence these digital environments have on the flipped learning experience are not only in the delivery and the curation of the content, but particularly on the interactions that occur. Educators can choose to utilize the institutional learning environments to facilitate interaction with the learners during the pre-sessional and the post-sessional activities. Furthermore, they can even design in formal digital interaction between the learners during the outside of classroom phases, although this does not change the fact that the learners may continue to have informal, learner-led interactions during these phases as well. The mobile nature of these environments, particularly the individual learner's personal learning environment, also changes the dynamic of the use of technology within the classroom space. Through the use of smartphones, the individual learner can bring their wider learning community into the classroom space and interact with them informally during this classroom contact time. From these observations, the use of technology and the digital environments change the dynamic of the flipped learning experience. This completes and gives the current state of the learning ecology of the flipped classroom that I have developed to date. The purpose of this model is to give educators who are designing flipped learning experiences an overview of the complexities and interdependencies that they would need to consider when designing flipped learning.